Can we talk about this scene from FNAF Help Wanted? Because I feel like as a community, we all collectively just chose to pretend we do not see it. The intro that makes the claim,
"While it's true that some stories associated with our name were loosely based on actual events, the majority of them were total fabrications from the mind of a complete lunatic." Lawsuits pending.
Yes, you heard that right. In Five Nights at Freddy's Help Wanted, they established that every preceding game in FNAF is an in-universe game that was made by a crazy person in order to discredit Fazbear Entertainment. What? If that's true, is none of what we've played before Help Wanted accurate to the real lore of Five Nights at Freddy's? That's what we're going to go into today, and let's make ourselves a theory. Come here, be a star, they love you. First, let's gather our ingredients, and we'll start with the claim itself. I played the full part of it in the intro, but they reference it again via Tape Girl later in the game. I think it's Vanessa, but it's hard to prove that Tape Girl is Vanessa, so I'll just say Tape Girl. And I'll play it over the opening intro.
They lied to all of us. They told us that the whole point of this VR game was to undo the bad PR done by a rogue indie game developer who supposedly made up a bunch of crazy stories that tarnished the brand. But that's not true at all. Fazbear Entertainment hired the game developer. Those indie games were designed to conceal and make light of what happened. This isn't just an attempt to rebrand. It's an elaborate cover-up, a campaign to discredit everything.
So Help Wanted is positing that in the Fazbear universe, there exists an indie dev that was paid by Fazbear Entertainment to make the FNAF games in order to downplay what really happened there and make it seem ridiculous and discredit anyone who would say something bad happened there. And also, the developer is someone who looks identical to Scott Cawthon. On the surface, this feels like Help Wanted is telling us, throw out all previous lore, we're starting fresh. But to be fair, technically they only said that indie games exist and they were made about Fazbear Entertainment by somebody who looks like Scott Cawthon. It implies the FNAF games, but let's get more specific. If we are to assume that this quote is talking about some of the games we've played, how can we tell which games it's talking about? Well, we have to look at what it does reference and what it doesn't reference. If something appears in Help Wanted or as Merchant Security Breach, then we can assume that Fazbear Entertainment is comfortable with the public knowing about it. So this would most likely be things that exist in those games. But if we don't see it, then it could be something they were trying to cover up or something that doesn't exist in those games. Already? Fair. I don't blame him. I sound terrible. I'm sick, if you couldn't tell. That explains the tea and the cough drops. But on the bright side, I look a lot nicer. As the video. The video looks nicer, thanks to an amazing community member by the name of Chickpea. So for those of you who don't know, in the description there's been a link called Koji. It's basically my link tree. It has all my socials and stuff, but at the bottom it says upgrade the channel, and that took you to a fundraiser that was going to get lights for the channel. I haven't really talked about it because it felt like I was being like, give me money if I talked about it, so I just let it be. But Chickpea, the madman, not only found it single-handedly, but then dropped the whole stack, and suddenly we have real lighting. Before I was using lamps with toilet paper on them. Now we have real lighting. It looks so much better. I had to make a whole new fundraiser. The new fundraiser is for a green screen. I never expected that people would even put $1 in the fundraiser, let alone someone just be like, hey, bam. So everyone in the comments, go and thank Chickpea. They're an amazing person. Anyways, back to the video. So what is shown? Straight away, FNAF 1, 2, and 3 have to be in-universe real games to the franchise. We literally play full recreations of them, piece by piece, in Help Wanted, even as the title of the game. Like, it doesn't get more direct of a reference than that. But there's more direct references here. FNAF 4 is also most likely an in-universe game, as we see Nightmare Fredbear and Nightmare Yon. Now, these are animatronics that were either in the dreams of Michael Afton or the Crying Child, or they could have possibly been real by William using illusion discs, we're not sure. In any case, these guys are not public knowledge, so if they exist in this game, they have to exist in a game, in an in-universe FNAF game made by that crazy indie dev. What about Sister Location? Well, on the surface, this does get tricky, because whether or not Sister Location is a real game in-universe, Circus Baby Party and Rental does exist. So Circus Baby, Funtime Foxy, Funtime Freddy, and Ballora still can exist in Help Wanted and further without Sister Location existing. But there's one key here that sticks out that leads us in a direction. Ennard. Ennard specifically only exists at the end of Sister Location when the Funtimes fuse together and then make Michael into a reverse mecha. Regardless, they should not exist in the public consciousness. They should exist more in the games because Ennard is super cool and we don't get enough Ennard, and I could even make a whole video about Ennard, so cool, we need more Ennard, but whatever. So when we see Ennard in Vent Repair, it makes it pretty clear that Sister Location has to be an in-universe game. Alright, well what don't we see in Help Wanted? Well, any references to Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator, Scrap Baby, Scrap Trap, Molten Freddy, and Lefty? make no appearances. You could argue that this is supposed to be plush Scrap Baby, but it's kind of a stretch. It kind of just looks like a beat up plush baby, but regardless, I'm not convinced. Moreover, there is no allusions to the gameplay of FNAF 6, whether that be the tycoon part, the actual game, the salvage minigame, which would have been really scary in VR. None of that appears in Help Wanted. This game doesn't once mention the existence of Pizzeria Simulator. I think that has to imply that that's not an in-universe FNAF game, but a game just for us of real events that happened in the FNAF universe. So, like many theories, the lore in this game should be taken with the utmost authority. There's actually one other really important thing to note that never gets referenced in Help Wanted: the 8-bit minigames. Specifically, anything that occurs only in 8-bit minigames, things like the original Fredbear and Spring Bonnie animatronics, the spirits, the alive Aftons, the child murders, none of that gets referenced in Help Wanted, which makes me think that these 8-bit minigames are not what Fazbear Entertainment wanted to be created, whether or not there are in the in-universe games. So what can we interpret these inclusions and exclusions as? Well, let's mix our ingredients together and see what comes out. Help Wanted seems to be implying that not everything between FNAF 1 and 5 is a lie, but rather introducing the idea of unreliability in the narrative and gameplay of those games. It could be thought that everything in those games are now suspect, but I think the purposeful lack of inclusion of any 8-bit references means that those minigames are probably more accurate to what really happened in Fazbear Entertainment's history. But maybe we should take the events of the games with less scrutiny. Again, except for Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator. The fact that this is the one game that's fully excluded from Help Wanted feels purposeful, as it's a game with a lot of lore that can help us tie things together, and we need it to be reliable if we're going to do anything about the lore of this game. Furthermore, because we can assume that it's not one of the in-universe indie games, we can use it to help better determine what is and isn't true about the other games. For example, in Henry's epilogue in FNAF 6, he talks about the crimes William committed and what his daughter Charlie did to rectify them. While he talks about this, 8-bit minigames from the previous games that depict those scenes are shown. If we take this in consideration with the lack of 8-bit representation in Help Wanted, it feels pretty clear to me that these minigames are accurate, or are at least things that Fazbear Entertainment don't want the public to know about. Now, whether or not those 8-bit minigames exist in the FNAF universe, in-universe real games, how do I say this? Now, whether or not the 8-bit minigames were snuck into the in-universe FNAF minigames by the indie dev against the wishes of Fazbear Entertainment, or if those minigames are only in the fake playable versions of the FNAF games that we have so the player can have more lore, that's unclear. It's hard to tell. It's hard to make heads or tails of that. Either way though, Fazbear Entertainment doesn't want that out there, so we can assume that that's more accurate to what actually happened, whereas the main gameplay is what Fazbear Entertainment is paying to put out there. There's a few extra considerations that are incredibly difficult to piece together with this analysis: Ultimate Custom Night, Special Delivery, and FNAF World. If I had to take a guess, I would lean for Ultimate Custom Night to not be an in-universe game. It feels too Easter eggy, it feels too weird, and it doesn't make sense for an in-universe game, especially if we consider that Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator probably isn't an in-universe game, and that does get referenced in Ultimate Custom Night. I will say though, Special Delivery does feel like an in-universe game. Not only do we get all this email lore via that game, but one of the therapists that Vanessa encounters supposedly gets mangled with machinery. We can assume this was done through Special Delivery. Maybe. And of course, as always with the lore of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, FNAF World is weird. I would say most likely, FNAF World as a game does exist in the FNAF universe. However, the FNAF World we play doesn't. I think when the spirits are getting together for Happiest Day, they find FNAF World either in one of those arcade machines or somewhere nearby, and they edit it in order to achieve Happiest Day. So, FNAF World does exist in universe, but the lore-filled version we play doesn't, or at least isn't massively playable. It happened like once. Alright, so assume so far everything I've said in this video is accurate to the franchise. What does this mean for FNAF? What's going on here? Well, let's pop our mixture into the oven and see what kind of theory bakes out. I think it's incredibly likely that Help Wanted is an inflection point in the franchise. I think Steel Wool and Scott realize how messy and self-contradictory the lore of the games can get, mainly due to poor planning. Look, I love this game franchise a lot, and I love piecing together all the little tiny bits of lore, but it's very clear if you analyze this objectively, the lore changed every time they released a game. At least within those first 4 to 5 games. Things had to be justified long after they were created. Accidental retcons happened. I mean, look at the foul odor remark in FNAF 1 and 2's pink slips. At the time, we all kind of assumed it was just a funny joke, and even Scott Cawthon came out and said, yeah, it's a funny joke. And then in Sister Location, suddenly our protagonist is a walking corpse. Is that a joke anymore? Was it intended to be a joke but is now lore? Is it still a joke and we're just misinterpreting it? It's weird. I think Scott and the team at Steel will want to be able to continue making a compelling narrative for the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, but they don't want to get bit in the ass by those little details. I personally think that it feels like Steel, Wool, and Scott are trying to do a soft reboot with Help Wanted. It feels like they're saying, look, the main themes of the story are still the same. The weird 8-bit minigames that gave us lore are still accurate, but maybe don't take every single little detail of the gameplay as pure fact. Some things will be inaccurate, some things will need to be retconned to make a compelling narrative, and in doing so, they cemented that Freddy Fazbear Pizzeria Simulator is canon and true, and so is everything after. But things that are before could be vaguely accurate or unreliable at times. That way they can focus on making a good story and an interesting mystery, and if they forget to count the toes of one of the animatronics, they can chalk it up to an unreliable narrator for the first few games. I know that's a controversial take, but I really think that is the point of the opening and the subsequent cassette tape. Whether or not it's best for the series, I personally do think it's more good than bad, but I think there could have been something else they would do. I think it was the express intent of Steel, Wool, and Scott to make it more feasible to craft a compelling story. They want to cherish the past, but they have to look towards the future. Speaking of the future though, the DLC is quickly coming upon us sometime in the next year. If you want to see what I think happened with the DLC via the poster they released, go ahead and check out that video. Shout out as always to the best patrons, the Toasted Slices, Emberisk, Zenith, Tommy Woodyard, Isle, Raven Eris, Charlie Bean, and Lovey Puppy. And until next time, as always, stay toasty, Slices.